Good today. We're on the home stretch, so almost over. It's a really great day. I really enjoyed, even as a vendor watching the presentation today. It's really inspiring to see a guy like Robert O'Neill and Chris Newcomb. You guys are so lucky. Such a great brand that you have. I'm a customer, probably too much of a customer of Nukes and Austin and our Arboretum location. So I know that you look at this title and it's like, it's not. It doesn't look like a fun, sexy topic. I'm just trying to make it fun and interactive, and I hope that you will help me by making it interactive. It's not a formal presentation, so feel free to shout out if you have a question, or if I ask you about something, then feel free to shout out your answer. So we'll get started. The first question I have is, what do you think of when you see this brand? Slushy. Yeah. What else do you think about? Convenience. That's a good one. Anybody have anything else? Those are two great ones that most people say. Somebody said Big Gulp earlier. What about this brand? What do you think about when you see this brand? Expensive. Yeah. What else? Convenient. Well, one thing that comes with convenient is they're everywhere, right? I mean, there's a Starbucks on every corner. So what about this brand? Credit card. Breach, right? Yeah. So that kind of sad though, because if I asked you the same question 2 years ago, what would you have said? What would you identify with Target? Walmart's competitor? Christmas. Oh, that's a good one. Christmas commercials. Well, one thing that I think is interesting, I have a wife that's obsessed with Target and spends most of my money there, but you wouldn't normally have a bad connotation associated with Target. Target's actually a pretty good brand. I mean, it's known as the higher, maybe higher price, but it's kind of the more upscale version of Walmart. People generally say better things about Target than they say about Walmart. They have clean stores. They have pretty good staff. I think over the last few years, actually, their staff's gotten really good and very attentive. But isn't it a shame? Target's been around for like 30 years or more, and they built their brand. They've done a great job building their brand, and one little malfunction has totally changed all of your perceptions of Target. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So it should be a fun discussion. What about these brands? Have you seen these brands in the news lately or heard anything about any of these brands? So probably all of you have heard about at least one of these brands getting breached. But every single one of these brands has had a data breach in the last 6 months. So the latest one, Dairy Queen, just happened last week. I'm not sure if you heard about that. But it's happening every day. I mean, you're hearing a new brand getting breached every day, and they're all in different verticals. Some of them are restaurants, some of them are retail. Every vertical that has sensitive information is at risk today of a breach. And I think these are interesting numbers, just to kind of put things in perspective of what the impact can be of a data breach. $236 million is what Target has spent so far on their data breach. What's important to note about that is that's so far. I'm very confident that will not be the only money they spend. I'm sure it will be much more. 40 million credit cards and debit cards were compromised. It's a lot. How many of you were affected by the Target breach? Actually, I'm surprised that that's the only hand that came up. Most of the time you have, so another one over there. Most people that I know had their credit cards replaced at least. Even if they were not compromised, the banks did a great job of proactively replacing the cards. So you probably at least know somebody that was affected. 70 million customer details are compromised. Now there's more than credit card information that can get compromised. I think right now today what's interesting is in the healthcare sector, that's where you're probably going to see the next names in the news, because it's one thing to get your credit card information stolen. It's a whole other thing to get your social security number stolen, your personal health records. That's when it really gets scary, and they're just as prone to getting attacked. You just don't hear about them as much. So 140 plus lawsuits. Target is being sued by everybody. That every vendor, every person that thinks that they can get on the gravy train. And I think that number will go up. So these are pretty impacting numbers. And you're probably thinking, okay, how do these affect me? The numbers may be smaller, but the same effects can happen to your average Nukes franchisee. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. So I'm just curious, how many of you think that Target handled their data breach well? That they did a good job post-breach? Yeah, it's funny because I did the same speech about a year ago in front of 2,500 pharmacies, and half the room raised their hand that they thought that they actually handled it pretty well. And I think what you're seeing is, as time goes by, people are becoming even less empathetic towards Target because they're seeing it happen over and over again. So it doesn't get better if you get breached. People don't get less angry or feel less violated. They have a worse feeling about your brand. I think we're going to see a lot of statistics and studies done on brand impact. It's a relatively new study, or a relatively new topic to study. But here's the thing. Well, first of all, let me ask, does anybody know what Target, some of the steps Target took after the breach? What some of the things that they did to try to smooth things over with the general public? Does anybody remember anything they did?
They did a discount day where
They did one day that you got like 15% off, right? Anybody remember anything else that they did?
I remember first they didn't disclose it.
Yeah, that was something I was going to mention. It's interesting that when they first discovered there was a breach, they sort of glossed over it and said, we don't think it's that big. Obviously it was huge, right? They also, the thing that people typically remember is, and I guess they did a pretty good job of this, is they offered free credit card loss prevention to all their customers, so you can get that. But even with all of that, or whether you say that's enough or not enough, nobody raised their hand to say that they thought it was enough, right? So clearly they didn't do a great job in your minds, and I don't believe they did a great job. But I don't think that they could have done anything that would have made people believe they did a great job. I mean, can anybody think of something they could have done that would have been better, or any ideas? I honestly don't know. I think the only thing you can do is be upfront, transparent, and I think they weren't very upfront and transparent. And I think that's probably the number one thing they did wrong. And we're going to talk about how to not make that same mistake. Here's something I think is also interesting. If anybody has a PF Chang's that's close to them, or if you've gone to one in the last couple of months, they got breached, and it was a pretty big breach. And their CEO just sent out this letter. And just in context, think about this. Think about if there was a breach, and it happened to one of your peers, another franchisee. But think about if Chris Newcomb had to send this out to the press or to your customers. How would that make you feel? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, PF Chang's as a franchise company would not be good. It would be devastating. And it'd be, how embarrassing would that be? I read this and my throat locked up because I'm thinking, oh, that must be a horrible thing to have to do. And you know what? I think this was the right thing to do too. I think he did the right thing. If you read this letter, it's a good letter. But you don't want to have to send that kind of letter out. Your brand is going to take a tumble, and Target, I think, is somewhere in that 30% as far as the brand reputation. And you can't, how long is it going to take before Target's not associated with a data breach? I mean, who knows? It could be a decade. It may always have that sort of bruise. So that's something that you want to think about. It says longer than a year to restore reputation. I can tell you right now, Target, who knows how long it will be. So here's an interesting slide that talks about numbers. And I know that most of you are not IT geek, network guys, and I think this is going to be very interesting to you. After this slide, you're going to probably know more about credit card security than some CIOs of major brands. The first thing is, if you get breached, the average cost of a breach is $80,000. Now that's not Target, that is a Nukes franchisee at one site. If you have 4 stores, multiply it by 4. And where that $80,000 comes from is the first thing that happens if you get breached is you have to do a forensic audit. And it's required, it's not an option. It's $20,000. Company comes in, they determine the scope of your breach, how it happened, how many people were affected, and then basically, how many gaps did you have in your PCI processes. And then you're gonna have to stop taking credit cards. So for a period of months until you prove that you are PCI compliant, which some of you may know that word and some of you may not know what that is, but you have to prove that you are completely compliant before you can take credit cards again. It could take months. Because of the fact, if you think about it, Billy, what percentage of your business is credit card business?
I'm not 100% sure.
Guess. What do you think it probably?
60, 70%.
60, 70%. Somebody said 80, 90%, which I wouldn't be surprised. Think about if you couldn't take credit cards for 3 months, what that would do for your business. It would be absolutely devastating to your business. So if you combine the cost and the fact that you couldn't take credit cards for a period of time, 70% of small businesses go out of business after a breach. They just can't, they're not financially able to cope with that. And 1 in 6 small businesses will suffer a credit card breach in the next 24 months. A couple of years ago, people always said, you made up that number. It's crazy. I don't hear about this. Well, what you hear about in the news is you hear about the big box stores. But what we hear about every day are the franchisees, the small businesses that get breached. And I'm going to tell you why you're such a target in just a minute. But I also want to talk about where these breaches are coming from. Most people don't understand what they are, how they happen. People still think of breaches as like the Matthew Broderick War Games type scenario where you got a kid in the basement of his parents' house. That's not how it happens. These guys are part of huge conglomerates. They're organized crime groups in Eastern Europe and China, and they've got a really complex structure. They have multiple layers. The guy that's selling your credit card information on a search engine is not the same guy that's hacking your network, finding open ports in your firewalls. So catching them you're never going to catch them. It'd be really great if we could have like Robert O'Neill go and find these guys, But it's just not going to happen. So your best defense is an offense, a good offense. Making sure that you're protected up front. And getting protected is not just about technology. See, the good news is you don't have to be the IT geek. The bad news is we're all responsible if you're in this room because of the things that you have to do. And so don't think that it's just the IT guy's responsibility or Adam's responsibility, because you're all part of this. And I'll tell you how and why. The last statistic is really interesting as well. So when you have a data breach, it's not like when your wife or your purse is stolen at Walmart and they run out and they use the credit card and then they ditch it, right? It's a really long process. So they find open ports. Like if you have a DVR system, they'll hack in your DVR system, get in your point of sale system, create malware and have it propagate. And then it's an average of 210 days before you detect it. So by the time somebody walks into your store and says, hey, I think my card information was stolen, it's done. It's over. You can't rewind that situation. You have to just deal with it reactively. So these are the things that hopefully, even if you don't own the nukes that you're at, makes you think, we got to look at this. We got to be more proactive about it. The bottom line in this part of the presentation is you do not want to be the reason that Nukes is in the headlines for something negative. That's not how you want Nukes to be perceived. You don't want to be in that target situation. And I'll tell you, I am an addict of Nukes. I love Nukes, whether you are a customer or not of mine, I love it. The 2 stores that I frequent are the Austin Arboretum store, which is within walking distance of my office, and the Waco, Texas store, which is where we meet my mother and trade off grandkids. Okay, so I spend my money there. I believe in the product, and the last thing I want, whether you use our company or use another company, protect yourselves. do it. And that's the moral of the story for the presentation. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about PCI. How many people have heard about PCI? Do you know, you heard the term at all? Nick, at least, I know you know the term. God, you're a customer. This is kind of an area that I think people are less familiar with. There's this acronym stands for Payment Card Industry, and it's really a conglomerate. It's a council that was formed in 2004, and it's real basic. The credit card companies decided to band together and push all the liability for a data breach down to the merchant. So now each of your companies are responsible for a data breach that happens. Not Nukes Corporate, they're responsible for their own stores. You're responsible for any costs that are incurred based on a breach that happens to you. And it's not a law like HIPAA, but let's face it, all the credit card companies got together. So if you want to process credit cards, you have to follow it. And when you sign your merchant agreement to take credit cards, you're actually signing that you will agree to be PCI compliant. Most people don't realize that, but it's true. There's a lot of inaccurate information, a lot of myths. People don't understand PCI, and it's not an easy process. And it's not just an IT process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The biggest myth is that your point of sale vendor gets you compliant. So had Reagan in from NCR at the first presentation, so said the exact same thing with him sitting in here, and he understands it. They have a different set of PCI requirements. It is great that NCR is PCI compliant, and they are. So that's step number one. But because they're compliant doesn't make your business entity compliant. You have to be compliant. There are other requirements outside of the point of sale system that you're required to do, like training and policies and scanning. NCR doesn't do that for you. So you need to, don't go down the path of thinking that you're protected because of your point of sale system. These are 3 questions that I've asked people in bathrooms at conventions. I've asked franchisees, I've asked CIOs, because people will ask me about data security. And I'm going to ask you the same questions because you should know these. If you answer no to one of these, then you're not PCI compliant. I don't care what kind of firewall you have. I don't care about, your IT guy. These are things you need to be aware of. So the first one is, do you train all your cashiers, all the people that handle credit cards within your organization? Do you train them with a PCI compliance security awareness program upon hire and annually? And I know you're thinking high turnover, it's hard to do it. You certainly don't have the turnover Taco Bell has, right? And they do it. They have 90% turnover. But that is a PCI requirement. It has nothing to do with firewalls. The second question is, have all your employees read and acknowledged or signed a security policy upon hire and annually? So probably most of you are thinking, yeah, when we hire people, we have a form that talks about security and they sign it and they're good. Well, that's a good start, but it has to be updated. And it has to include all the PCI requirements, and it has to be updated on an annual basis because things change, processes change. So that has to be done annually. And they are going to audit. If you get breached, they will audit this. They'll look at all of these things. The third is, can you demonstrate that you have a remote access system that you access from home or somewhere else that includes 2-factor authentication? The good news for you guys is Adam has put that in place for you. So just if you have any other businesses that you own and you access your business remotely, if you're using free Log Me In or Go to My PC, that's not PCI compliant. You don't want to use that. You want an enterprise version that has 2 forms of authentication. So say you enter your password and then it texts you and you have to enter a unique code to get in. So again, if you answered no to one of these, then you're not compliant. And don't feel bad because I've had some pretty big companies, brands, say no to these. I've had to say, hey, you realize you're not where you need to be. And it's a real eye-opener for them because they think of compliance and security in terms of firewalls and endpoint security, not processes. And people hate doing this stuff, this process stuff. So anyway, good things to remember. So why are you at risk? Why would somebody go after a Nukes, right? Well, because you're a perfect target. People have outdated firewalls. They think they can go buy a firewall from Best Buy. The truth is you need an enterprise class firewall. You guys have a lot of technology in your stores. It's something that, I mean, go think about the average Burger King. You know, they have digital menu boards, drive-through timers, DVRs, all those technology points that come in through your broadband connection. They're points of weakness and a way for a hacker to get in. So not understanding your security configurations, having a flat network that guest Wi-Fi can get into your point-of-sale system, all those things are very common in the restaurant industry. And then just negligence. I mean, it's a strong word, but not knowing what you don't know. I mean, you're not security experts, right? You're focused on food quality and a great customer experience. It's just not an area of expertise. So that's why they love to target restaurants. So we talked about this a little bit. If you do get breached, you have to immediately stop taking credit cards. You have to do a forensic audit. And then you have to remediate. So all those gaps that you have with PCI, before you can take credit cards again, the bank will ask you to prove that you are 100% PCI compliant. So would you rather do it proactively, or would you rather do it under the gun when you're being charged the amount of money that they're going to charge you, and not taking credit cards, not having an income stream? So very important to think of this proactively. And then kind of beyond PCI, beyond data security, I wanted to talk about having a crisis management plan. How many of you actually have a crisis management plan in place today at your franchise? Come on, Nick.
I would call you.
So I really want you to think about this. And it's not something that, I know it's not something that's fun to think about, but you have to. Because there are a lot of different kinds of crises. And crisis can be something small, like, I don't know, I mean, I've been in the franchise world. I owned a little gym at one point because, you can tell I got a gymnast physique, so I was always, no, I'm just kidding. But I did, and so if you've been to a little gym, it's kids gymnastics, balance beams, a lot of equipment. And there was definitely a crisis management plan we had in place, because if a kid broke their leg or their arm, you need to be able to deal with it without getting sued, right? And so one thing that they told you is you got to educate your staff on what to say immediately, and you don't just pick up the phone and call 911, because that shows, well, first of all, people panic. You got 3- and 4-year-old kids running around. If you have all these sirens, it panics them, and you don't want to admit that you did something if you didn't. So you need to understand messaging. You need to understand what you want your employees to say in a crisis. What if somebody fell down, broke their leg in the middle of your Nukes? Do you have a plan for that? I mean, what if somebody, what if you ran out of bread? I mean, I know it's a crazy example. So if there was a problem with your bread distribution and you couldn't serve bread for a week, what would you do? Does anybody have any ideas? I mean, off the top of you?
Yeah.
Call Janet. Somebody said earlier, you know what? We would market our salads. We would sell salads. We wouldn't close our doors. Well, I hope you wouldn't close your doors. I hope you'd have some sort of backup, because I was a business owner. I would hate to close my doors for any reason. But think about things like that. What would you do if something like that happened to function on a daily basis? So it's more than just data crisis management. It's crisis management as a whole. And again, it's not fun to talk about, but you need to be able to predict what are some of the possible things that could happen. Employee injury, customer injury, food contamination, all these things you don't want to think about. Credit card breach, you need to think about those things and how you would handle them with your staff. Prepare for it. Put a checklist together. What are some of the things that I would do? What's the short list of contacts that I would have for each kind of crisis? Your short list for a bread issue is a different short list than your technology vendors or some kind of technology crisis or data breach. Would your staff, if you were out and there was a crisis, would your staff be able to find that short list? I mean, hey, maybe you're in the Bahamas for a week, hopefully, at some point. Would they be able to function in a crisis? And you got to think about that. Education. Education is something you have to do with every employee, and you have to continue to do it because your business evolves. Things evolve. 20 years ago, if any of you were in the restaurant industry 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about credit card security then. That wouldn't be a crisis that you would be worried about. But today it is. It's a huge crisis. So you got to evolve, you got to change. And then here's the fun part. You got to validate it. So I would encourage you to put together a crisis management checklist or something, even if it's a very loose process, and then validate it. Go through a fake crisis, and see how it plays out. We actually did that as an exercise at ANX. I mean, different scenario, but we tested it out. What if we ran out of a product, or we had a major catastrophe? We ran through and had the whole company, from ordering to ops to customer support, sort of went through the process to validate it. So I know it's not fun, it's not the sexiest topic at your next staff meeting, but I would encourage you to do it. And the beautiful thing about validating something like that is that even if it's just like somebody breaks a leg at your store, and may be totally unrelated to a data breach, at least you've done the exercise. It doesn't have to be an exact match. This is really interesting. When you look at types of crises, the financial impact and customer reaction, when you compare a fire, natural disaster to a data breach, it's amazing to look at the similarities and the differences. Similarity is that you're going to be out of a pretty significant amount of revenue for a period of time. There's going to be a financial loss. And people will be empathetic, and they will likely rally around you in the community. In fact, there was just a nukes that actually burned not too long ago, so it's happened. But they'll come back, and they'll probably actually rally around you. First couple of days reopening, I'm sure you'd have an uptick in business. If you have a data breach, you're going to have the same financial impact, but people are going to be angry, they're going to be violated, they're going to feel like you're responsible personally. And the scary thing is 31% of customers will likely not come back. They're going to hold you responsible for that. And not all breaches happen because, they might not even be your fault. Somebody can lay a credit card on a counter, and somebody in line can take a picture of it with their iPhone, and you're still responsible. It's within your brick and mortar. That's a breach, and it's a non-network breach. A skimmer is a non-network breach. It doesn't always have to be something that involves a hacker within your network. So this is, I think, very interesting and unfortunate, but true. So you got to be prepared. You got to think like a big company. Think about how you would invest in making sure that you're prepared for anything that might happen. You got to make sure your response is spot on. Do you have a response? Do you want to have a response? Should it be a reactive response? If you find out something that may, we've had people or companies before that have lost or had a laptop stolen with credit card information on it. Maybe wasn't breached yet, but should they call all their customers? What should you do? So you need to think about what your reaction is going to be, or how proactive you want to be in notifying your customers when something happens. And who are you going to trust with that information? I mean, you think, well, my kitchen staff doesn't need to be involved. Well, they're people just like everybody else. They talk to their friends, they talk to their neighbors. You want to make sure that they're not saying something that's going to implicate you more. And just be prepared. Have a checklist together. And just like the Target situation, it's better to respond quickly and be transparent and be totally honest than to try to cover it up. Just be completely honest. And know your customers. You guys are great about knowing. You have a very specific sort of demographic, and you know your customers. What do you need to do to make sure that you keep the loyalty that they have to your business? What's the appropriate response for your community, right? And one thing I'll point out is the way you respond in your community may be different than the guy 2 states over. Or one thing to keep in mind is privacy laws are different in each state. So you may be required to actually contact your customers in the event of a data breach at a certain point. So you really want to read up on those data privacy laws. And these are just some of some good ideas of what you can do when you're executing a crisis management plan. One thing we have is we have a checklist, a template that I'll be happy to email you that you could use as a starting point. But these are things you need to think about. You might have to set up a call center. The great thing about Google Voice is you can do that in 10 minutes and look like a pretty sophisticated company. But just think about these things. What's your triage situation to handle it? Do you have like a committee? I think it's great to have a committee for different crises. So if you're a pretty big franchisee and you have an IT guy, they might lead the committee for data security. So think about that when you're putting together a plan. Who are going to be the appropriate people that you want to have steer that crisis? And then, of course, you have to report a breach to federal and state agencies. And again, per state, it might be a little different. So hopefully you won't have a huge crisis, but if you do have a crisis, take the opportunity to understand what you did well and what you need improvement on. Did your plan work? How would you change it? Where did it break down? What were some of the steps you put in really unnecessary, or are they obsolete because they were put in place several years ago? And who should be on the crisis management team? I think I've mentioned this several times, but you need the right team of people to get the results that you want. You don't want just anybody talking about this stuff or a crisis without the right verbiage, without the right information. If you have people that are uninformed about what happened, then they could say anything, and you don't want that. You want to control, especially in a world of social media, where probably if you look at Facebook in your community, a lot of your customers are connected somehow to someone on Facebook, right? It's like its own little ecosystem. And one person puts something up on Facebook, and who knows how many people now have you on their radar. So you don't want the wrong message getting out there from your employees or your customers. So this is just the crisis management checklist. This seems very corporate, but it's something that I would really encourage you to do as operations managers. And we have, like I said, a version of this that I'm happy to send to you. Glenn has some small pieces of paper, kind of doubling an iPad Air giveaway with this. So if you just want to be sent one of these in soft copy, we're not going to spam you or anything. We'll send this to you. And if you have any questions about your deployment or how you're set up, we'll answer those as well. So I want to talk a little bit about PCI specifically again. One thing, if you remember one thing in this presentation, I would take a picture of this slide. We're going to send the slides out as well. But when you're working with a data security company, it's kind of like working with a plumber. You want someone who has the credentials that are necessary to protect your business. So always work with a qualified security assessor and an approved scanning vendor, a QSA and an ASV. If you're working with a security company today, go back and see if they're a QSA or an ASV. And you should be able to just go to their website and find out. There are websites you can search on the list to see if they are an approved scanning vendor or a QSA. The reason this is important, it's like if your brother-in-law is going to fix your plumbing. You want a master plumber to do that. There's certain things that you want the highest credentials for. And we spend a lot of money and a lot of time and energy to make sure that our qualifications are kept up to date. We're not the only QSA ASV, so I'm not saying we're it. But just make sure you're dealing with that kind of company. Also, there are companies out there that say they work with a QSA or they work with an ASV. Well, that's not the same thing. You want them to have those qualifications. Highest credentials from the PCI Council. Also, do they understand retail? Do they understand restaurants? Security in a retail environment versus a restaurant environment versus a healthcare environment is different. So you want to make sure that that company has experience there. And then, just like you're validating your compliance for, or you're validating your disaster recovery plan, you need to validate your compliance. I'm not sure, probably most of you don't know where you are with your compliance today or with your data security. And you're thinking, well, that's my owner or IT guy's responsibility. Well, not necessarily. Many of the things that you need to do within your franchise are based on HR requirements or training. I mean, I doubt your IT guy is going to be responsible for all of your, training. So you need to integrate this these kind of processes within your business. You do want to have a firewall. That's kind of the most IT geek thing I'll say. You want to have an enterprise class firewall. Make sure that's in place. And you want to make sure that you have a partner that's going to walk you through this stuff, going to handhold you. There are different businesses with different ways of doing business, different kinds of deployment scenarios, and you want somebody that can sort of help you walk through those and be a partner, not just a technology vendor. So how do you get compliant? How do you train your people? Most PCI companies like ours will have a portal that you can use, and at any point you should be able to track your compliance. And it's a multi-departmental type thing. So, the training might be one person's responsibility. Scans is probably going to be a more technical person. But these are some of the things that you should have at your disposal that you may not even know that you need to have on your radar. So having some sort of tool that tracks your store's compliance is important along with the firewall. So again, going back to the crisis management, predict, prepare, educate, and validate. And I know, again, that doesn't sound fun, but I highly recommend it. You don't want to be in the news and have that negative target connotation, especially in a growing brand like news. And when you're looking at growing brands, the big thing is, you want to have new franchisees join the group. And if you have a brand that's been breached versus a brand that hasn't been breached, that can be a deciding factor. So it affects all of you, whether the breach happens within your stores or not. So we do have a limited number of these books. I don't know if we even actually have any more, but if you want to give your email address, again, not to spam you, but we can give you some of that information. If you just want to have a discussion about PCI or data security, if you have any questions, certainly come ask. One topic that I know we've been talking a lot about is catering, because there's a lot of credit card information that's written down in the catering side of business. The good news is what Adam is going to talk about puts a lot of those safeguards in place, but I'll give you a couple of tips in the meantime until you get things rolled out. If you can at all avoid writing down a credit card number and always put the information directly into the system that you're using, that's PCI compliant. It's actually PCI compliant. You can write a credit card number down, but you have to immediately destroy it after you use it. And unfortunately, that almost never happens. I mean, you're usually writing it down because you're not at your office. But you want to make sure and get the credit card information into an electronic system that will process it, and then you're done with it. That has nothing to do with the firewall, right? That's a process. Those are the kind of things that you may not have thought about that are part of PCI. You want to have processes in place that follow PCI requirements, because if you get audited, those are the things they're going to look at. Any questions before I hand it over to Adam about credit card security or data security or crisis management? I know they're sexy, fun topics.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said on your website there was a video test you could take.
Yeah, actually, there is an assessment that you can take that it's not real IT centric, but it asks a few questions and it'll sort of give you an assessment of where you are, and we can give you that.
Well, I didn't know if that could be on our scoots.
So, yeah, there will be kind of two portions to this, but yeah, you will need e-learning materials. A lot of you are probably thinking, why am I hearing about this as an operator or a general manager? Well, the truth is there's a lot more to it than IT. There's training that has to be held for owners, employees, and your IT staff, right? And we definitely will have some of that integrated into schools. So it's important that you have a plan. And Chad's not here to sell, he's just here to educate. We have a couple partners that we recommend, but if you want to use a totally different partner, that's okay too, but just make sure that they do what Chad said, they're an ASB QSA. And that's really why we're talking to all of you, because you touch so many of those areas. You write credit card numbers down. They might not be under lock and key, and Salesforce is gonna require you to have credit card numbers, and we're gonna talk about some of the things that we will have in place so you can compliantly store those within the point of sale going forward.
All right, anybody else have a question, or?
The standard cost for the Nukes operation.
Well, I can tell you what our cost is. We have a rate that actually is very, very low compared to all of our other customers. You guys kind of got in at a legacy cost, but it's a managed service, so it's not a capital investment. Everything we do is sort of security as a service, so it's monthly. It's a $70 a month cost. That includes the firewall that's totally managed by us. It's really kind of a set it and forget it firewall. And then the portal, which has e-learning, security policies, scanning, all of that in there, that you can track compliance for all your stores. Most Nukes, I will tell you that you generally need, because of all the stainless steel you have, if you're going to offer wireless Wi-Fi, then you generally need an extra wireless access point out in the lobby, because that stainless steel, our firewalls come with Wi-Fi, but the stainless steel blocks the signal or degrades it. So in, I think, every deployment I've ever done for Nukes, we've needed an extra wireless access point, and that's an extra $10 a month to manage. But the nice thing is if the firewall goes down or you have an issue, we overnight a new one. There's no cost for it, you're not paying. These firewalls are like $2,000, $3,000 firewalls. You don't pay for that up front. We own it, we manage it, so you don't have that capital cost. Hopefully that answers your question without being too much of a sales guy. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.